A Nefarious Nightmare contains themes that may be explicit or triggering for some. Specific warnings and disclaimers will be mentioned in the show notes. A Nefarious Nightmare assumes all parties that are mentioned in these cases to be innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. Listener discretion is strongly advised. Welcome to Season 4.
Hi everyone, it's me, Courtney. I just want to let you all know that we are still taking a week off because, quite frankly, I'm just very overwhelmed and sad. I'm taking my mom's passing a bit harder than I thought I ever would have anticipated, so in the meantime, please check out the following feed drop by our friends over at Murder and Mimosas podcast. Murder and Mimosas is a mother and daughter duo that bring lesser-known crimes to the podcasting world with a mimosa in one hand and a sprinkle of sarcasm throughout. The following feed drop episode is titled The McMartin Preschool Ritual Abuse. Now, I felt that this episode would do well on our platform given the subject matter and the fact that it discusses crimes against some of our most vulnerable bees, which would be children. Did one preschool secretly abuse children for almost 30 years with no disclosures? Or did Satanic Panic lead to a witch hunt of secret tunnels under the preschool where supposedly hundreds of children were sexually abused, witnessed satanic rituals, and other outlandish claims? The McMartin family and their employees' lives and livelihoods would be ruined by the accusation of one mother. You can find more information at www.murderandmimosas.buzzsprout.com. You can also find Murder and Mimosas anywhere that you get great podcasts. Please head on over to their platforms and leave them a 5-star rating and review. Raven, thank you so much for your idea to create a feed drop file in our time of need. And to the ladies at Murder and Mimosas, thank you so much for your feed drop. You all are amazing. Now everyone, please enjoy the following episode and remember, be vigilant. For when you mess with the bees, you get the hive.
Welcome to Murder and Mimosas.
Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. Our show is Murder and Mimosas. It's a true crime podcast. This means that we do discuss crimes, including but not limited to disappearances, murder, and sexual assaults. All our episodes are told with the respect of the victims and the victims' families in mind. We strive to ensure that we provide factual information, but some information is more verifiable than others. With that, grab your mimosas and let's dive in.
Welcome back. I'm Shannon.
And I'm Danica.
We're going to tell you the story of the McMartin Preschool sexual abuse trials. So let's get started. The McMartin Daycare was a family-run preschool in Manhattan Beach, California. Virginia McMartin founded the preschool in 1956. Her daughter, Peggy McMartin Bucky, was the administrator. Two of her grandchildren were teachers, Ray and Peggy Ann Bucky, along with others that weren't relatives, but we'll get into those later. Virginia found herself single at the age of 49 when her husband left her, and she was forced to take odd jobs to make ends meet. One being at a church nursery. She ended up borrowing money and bought her own preschool, and she eventually opened another. She received many awards for her work, such as the Rose and Scroll Award in 1977, and she always had a waiting list for her preschools. On May 12, 1983, a parent by the name of Judy Johnson drops her 2.5-year-old son off named Billy at the daycare. Once she picks him up that day, she calls the police and says her son has been sexually assaulted by the 25-year-old teacher, Ray. She claims to know this because she took her son to the doctor that day because her son's bottom itched. She also claims that she noticed a spot of blood on his bottom.
Okay, I'm a mom of a son about that age, so I don't want to mom shame, but who takes a toddler to the doctor for their bottom itching? Because that's like prime toilet training. I'm assuming if their bottom itched, it probably didn't work very well. And I get the whole blood thing, but she didn't notice that when she took him. Like it doesn't sound like she took him for that. Like, it sounds like she noticed it after the fact, is what I'm saying.
Yes. So, yes, that was my thoughts exactly. And no, the blood was to have been found at the, no blood was ever found at the doctor visit. So this wasn't her only allegation, though, but we will get into that. So September 7th, 1983, Ray is arrested due to the allegations, but released later that day due to lack of evidence. Though the police let him go, Police Chief Harry Comier sends out letters to present and past preschool parents, telling them that Ray is suspected of child molestation, and he needs their assistance to find out if there's any other victims. The letter further said, our investigation indicates that possible criminal acts, including oral sex, fondling of genitals, buttocks or chest area, as well as sodomy, were possibly committed on the pretense of taking the children's temperature. Pictures may have also been taken of the children without their clothing. If you have ever observed Ray, if your child has ever observed Ray Bucky, leave the classroom alone with the child during nap time or observed him tie up a child, it is important to let them know. In closing, he says, keep the investigation confidential. I will say that he does say there is no evidence to indicate that management had any knowledge of this, but he definitely doesn't say there's no evidence of this at all, which is why they are investigating. So, all right, Danica, you have a child in daycare. What are your thoughts if you get a letter like this in the mail from the police?
I mean, especially if they don't say that they don't have any evidence, it's just an unfounded allegation so far, I would be freaking out. I mean, I probably would take my kid out of that daycare. I would be up in arms, you know. I mean, especially because my son, he said, is only 2.5. So, like, as far as speaking, he can't tell me a whole lot. But I still would be upset. Like, it just wouldn't sit well with me as a parent to get a letter like that.
Yeah. So, not to mention, a lot of people get a letter like this and they don't read, we are investigating that this possibly may have happened. They are reading, this happened. So Judy isn't happy to know that Ray was released, and she writes a letter to the district attorney. She tells the DA that her son had been part of a satanic ritual with the McMartin staff. Let me remind you that amidst the Satanic Panic that we've talked about before, so this is going on during all this time. So,
and we do go way more in depth about the Satanic Panic and what all happened in our West Memphis 3 episodes if you want more information about Satanic Panic.
Yes. So the DA's office can't let accusations like this go. So they enlist the help of a woman named Key McFarland. She worked at the Children's Institute as a social worker. As part of her job there, she was to identify and treat abused children. She has a bachelor's degree in fine arts and a master's degree in social work. If you're wondering how you are going to identify abused children, you probably won't find the answers in this podcast. She begins interviewing the children, 400 in fact, as to possible sexual abuse at the preschool. Of the 400, she identified 360 were sexually abused at the preschool. Not only were there interviews with the children, 150 of those children also were giving examinations by Dr. Astrid Hagar, who also worked at the Children's Institute. She states that 80% of the children she examined had in fact been molested. I also want to say examinations are used loosely here, the term. Her idea of an examination is not based on physical evidence, as you would expect, but on medical history and her briefs. Oddly enough, she did have initial physical examinations where 6 children were found to have actually been molested, though this does not tell who molested them. Apparently, though, this didn't work for the prosecution or for Key. I'm not sure who the ringleader was here, and it changed to 80% of the children. So let me give you more details as to what Judy tells the DA as she continues to meet with them. This is what she says Billy has told her. She says they, being the daycare, were at a church doing communion and a prayer similar to the Lord's Prayer, and during the ritual, Peggy cuts a baby's head off and burns the brains, and he was forced to drink the baby's blood. He also talks about 3 teachers at the school dressing as witches and burying him in a coffin without holes in it. She also tells of another time Billy was on a train and staples were put in his ears, nipples, and tongue. There are more outlandish stories told by Judy, but let's stop here for a minute. So, Danica, you do have a son a little over 2.5, and we both know he cannot even begin to articulate these things. He doesn't have this kind of vocabulary at this age, and he's not going to examine a coffin for holes. So this all is very absurd to me.
No, he doesn't have this kind of thought process or vocabulary. No child at 2.5 does, unless she has a genius on her hands. My son couldn't tell you what a coffin is, or
something similar to the Lord's Prayer, but not the Lord's Prayer.
My son's heard the Lord's Prayer, but he doesn't know it's called that. He doesn't know what communion is, even though he's partaken in it. He just knows he gets bread and juice. I mean,
I know. And it really, I think, helps having him at this age where you're like, really like, seriously? Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's easy to do some parallels here.
Yes.
No, this just isn't adding up. The math ain't mathing for me.
No. So I don't know this child's intellect, but I do know I saw in an interview in which Ray described this child as a nonverbal child in the daycare. And this child also didn't go there for very long. These sadly wouldn't be the only accusations, and Judy won't be the only one slinging them. Let's go back for a minute, though. Your child had staples in his ears, nipples, and tongue, and you didn't notice anything, but you took him to the doctor for a butt itch. I'm going to have to say this stuff it's just not adding up. So on March 22nd, 1984, Ray, Peggy, Virginia, and Peggy Ann, as well as Mary Ann Jackson, Bet Radar, and Babette Splitter are indicted on 115 counts of child abuse. Mary Ann, Betty, and Babette are teachers that worked at the daycare as well, but they weren't relatives. Within 2 months, 93 more counts were added, and by August of 1984, it had jumped to 397, and 30 other people associated with the preschool were under investigation. Due to some of the interviews with Key, there are all kinds of stories being told. Children are saying they were molested by groups of men and women in public bathrooms and in tunnels under the school. There were animal mutilations and drinking of blood. One boy went as far to say he saw Ray beat a horse with a baseball bat. They played naked games and were pictured naked. Of course, police searched all 7 defendants' homes for evidence as well as the preschool. They searched for secret rooms at the preschool and underground tunnels, and there was no evidence ever found anywhere. You would think that maybe they may drop the charges because they have absolutely nothing, but that does not happen. In March of 1985, a group of about 50 McMartin parents wanted to take matters into their own hands, and they wanted to find these secret tunnels, and they began digging a lot next to the school. They are digging for days, and then the DA hires an archaeologist firm to help find the secret tunnels. To their dismay, no secret tunnels or rooms were ever uncovered.
Okay, so the DA is able to hire an archaeological firm to help with this after police said they couldn't uncover anything. Where is all this money coming from?
This is actually the costliest ever trial that they're going to have at $15 million and spanned over 7 years. But to answer your questions more directly, CII raised money for the investigation, and they raised $11 million. So many of the defendants couldn't afford bail, and Ray was held without bail. This means some of them were in jail for 2 years before the preliminary hearings ended. Betty Radar was one of them. She and her husband had to sell their home just to afford to pay attorney fees. The preliminary hearings were over in January of 1986, and the DA ended up dropping charges against 5 of the 7 because there just wasn't enough evidence. Sad to say, these women spent 2 years in jail, and people like Betty lost their homes because of this. The daycare was shut down because of the allegations. They lost their livelihoods. But was all this in vain? Ray and his mother are the 2 that the DA decides they are going to still go forward and try and convict. Peggy Ann was questioned, why were they being tried and the rest were being released? And she said, that's a good question, but she doesn't know. In December of 1986, Judy ended up dying of alcohol poisoning. With this, some digging is done, and Chief Prosecutor Rubin reveals she may have held some exculpatory evidence from the defense. That evidence turns out to be Judy was an alcoholic, as well as she suffered from schizophrenia. Remember, she is the person who started this whole thing in motion with her allegations.
Okay, hang on a minute. So you're telling me that the lawyers who are prosecuting this did not do their due diligence to find out she was an alcoholic and schizophrenic?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the trial, I know.
$15 million went very far in this case. I see.
We haven't even finished all this. This is just the craziest thing I've ever heard. So the trial is set and it begins on July 14th, 1987. There are a few children that testify, and their testimony has all kinds of holes in it, as well as the parents who testify. Of course, Key is basically their key witness, and she is the one she's on the stand for 5 weeks. Yes, you heard me, 5 weeks.
Good God.
For one, they want to know why in 28 years, not one single child had said anything to anyone about this abuse. And now there are over 300 kids who suddenly remember this after being interviewed by her.
This right here. Thank you.
Yes. So she said the children suffered from CSAAS, which is Sexual Abuse Accommodation Syndrome, which she says children learn to accept because there is no way out. Side note, there are several states that prohibit any testimony as to CSAAS, and it is not accepted by the American Psychiatric Association or by the American Psychological Association. In fact, one of the children that witnessed was asked by the defense why she never said anything about any of this before, and she said Key helped her memories come back. She couldn't remember it until Key helped her. The defense is also questioning her interview techniques. The defense is saying these are leading questions she is asking when they review the videos of the interview. Let me give you an example. This comes from a transcript from an 8-year-old boy she interviewed. Keep in mind she's using puppets and anatomically correct dots. Danica, do you want to be Key and I will be this boy?
Okay, that sounds good to me. Mr. Monkey is a little bit chicken, and he can't remember any of the naked games, but we think you can, because we know a naked game that you were around for, because the other kids told us, and it's called Naked Movie Star. Do you remember that game, Mr. Alligator, or is your memory too bad?
No, I don't remember that game.
Oh.
Well, it's a little song that me and a friend heard of. I heard out loud someone singing Naked Movie Star, Naked Movie Star.
You know that, Mr. Alligator? That means you're smart, because that's the same song the other kids knew, and that's how we really know you're smarter than you look. So you better not play dumb, Mr. Alligator.
Well, I didn't really hear a whole lot. I just heard someone yell it from out in I don't know, someone just yelled it.
Maybe you peeked in the window one day and saw them playing it, and maybe you could remember and help us?
Well, no, I haven't seen anyone playing a naked movie star. I've only heard the song.
What good are you? You must be dumb.
So this, of course, goes on and on. All the interviews are like this. Key, in my opinion, badgers them until they say what she wants them to say, and she's feeding them what she wants them to say by telling them what the other kids have said. Key also would have to stop the video at what children are admitting to for the parents to watch when they are so-called affirming their molestation. She doesn't let the parents watch all of it, and they aren't in there when the interviews happen. The defense can't understand how she can call the kids dumb or insinuate it and think that she's not leading the kids. For the so-called expert witness, the defense had someone to refute what was said. The prosecution did also find themselves an informant by the name of George Freeman. He testified that Ray had confessed that he had sexually molested all those kids, had incestuous relationships with his sister, shipped pro materials to Denmark, and buried incriminating photos of himself in South Dakota. I'm sorry, that was supposed to be pornography. Why George wasn't able to get him to tell him where these pictures were for evidence, I guess we'll never know. Oh, wait, maybe because he's full of crap?
If Key would say, what good are you? You must be dumb.
I know. In cross-examination, it was revealed that he had 9 felonies for robbery, was an informant for another trial that he committed perjury in when there was evidence to prove he was lying, and George admitted to that but said he wasn't lying now, though. So on November 2nd, 1989, the trial ended. The trial was almost 30 months. This is insane. Can you imagine being on jury duty that long?
That's over a year.
Yes. No, not over a year. Oh, months. Yeah, I'm sorry. I was thinking weeks, but yeah.
It's really
months.
over 2 years.
Yes.
2 years.
Yes. The jury, of course, have to deliberate and decide a verdict. I've never heard of this before, but the jury spent 2.5 months deliberating. They come back deadlocked, and it's a mistrial. The DA decides to drop the charges against Peggy. Tons of parents from the McMartin daycare are marching the streets chanting, "We believe the children." Of course, the DA feels pressure again, so they do retry Ray. The second trial was not nearly as long as the first, thank goodness, because who has that kind of time? The prosecution presents its case in only 13 days. Remember, Key was on the stand for 5 weeks before, but they choose not to use her this go around. Apparently, that was part of the issue with the previous jury, as she was very leading in their opinion. The jury comes back deadlocked as well, and there is another mistrial. The DA decided to drop the charges on Ray. I cannot imagine the toll this must have taken on Ray. He has since said he just wants to be left alone, which I totally get. He did say he doesn't blame the children at all. They were put through so much too. Actually, think about that, Danica. These kids are browbeat to believe they are molested. They are questioned by their parents, the police, and Key. They don't know what to think, I'm sure.
Yeah, the damage is probably caused, it's caused these kids damage when they're claiming that they're going to find the damage that's already been caused. Because, especially as a little kid, the police are supposed to be there to protect you. Your parents are supposed to be there to protect you. And they're telling you, these things happen to you. And so you think that that's what happened. Even if you know deep down it's not, as a kid, you don't really have, the ability to fight and say, no, that's not what happened to me. Because these are the people that you're, it's ingrained in you to trust.
Yes. So the claims were crazy and far-fetched in this episode, but remember, it was during the Satanic Panic, and maybe this was believable to them. I am in no way saying don't believe your kids, but at least investigate some before you blindly believe them.
I would just like to say, always believe your kids. I don't think any kid came up with this and said any of this. I think a mother who was a drunk, paranoid schizophrenic said these things. I wholeheartedly do not believe her 2.5-year-old said a word of it.
No.
So if your kids say something, 100% believe them.
Yes.
I don't think a kid said anything.
No. So, I mean, I don't want to say, don't believe your kids, but I, too, worked at a daycare. I was a Head Start teacher many years ago, and I remember one mother coming to me saying her son said I hit him in the head with a hammer the day before. And I was baffled. And I said, that didn't happen. We don't even have a hammer here. And don't you think his head would be bleeding and he'd have a bump? And she's like, well, I asked, she's like, I didn't check for that. And so she checked then and there was nothing. So, I mean, I'm not going to say your kids can't be wrong. They do come up with some crazy stories sometimes, but at least investigate before you just go,
Yes, advocate for your children, but with common sense.
Yes.
Clearly, says, teacher hit me in the head with it. My kids, I have kids that are kindergarten to 2nd grade right now, and one of them will walk straight up to me and say, my leg is broken. And I'm like, that's crazy. You just walked up to me. Like, obviously, that's not true because I have common sense and I can see that they're walking on both legs. Fine. But, yeah, there's common sense that has to be had. But, yeah, definitely use it. Use it. But advocate for your children. This was a case where one lady who was a drunk schizophrenic was believed, and it was blown way out of proportion, and it ruined the lives of all of these people, and people lost their house, people lost their jobs, people lost their livelihood, they spent years in jail, their names will forever be marred, and these kids were also traumatized.
Yeah.
So this is a wild case. It's just crazy to think that it went this far, that people that you would think have some sort of common sense or education, these attorneys, these judges, all of them, these investigators, the police, never sat there and go, I don't really think a 2.5-year-old can say that. Just doesn't seem like it adds up to me.
It's crazy. And then you think it wasn't even that, I guess it does sound that long ago now, but in the 80s, and you're like, we weren't that stupid in the 80s, were we?
Well, apparently y'all were, at least here in California. I don't know what they were doing, but they were off. But anyway, this is a crazy case, and it's, I think, kind of a pinnacle of Satanic Panic.
Yes.
Which is why I think it's really interesting. It's crazy to see how fear-mongering in the media can, really, I think, push this. I don't think that this would happen the way it happened then, today. And it kind of is the same thing with the West Memphis 3. I don't think that trial would have happened the way it happened today, like it did then. And Satanic Panic played a role in that. And it's just crazy to think how something like that can
I agree.
Push something like this. But anyway, advocate for your children, but please, for all that is holy, have common sense.
Yes.
I know it's not that common, but we believe if you're listening to us that you probably have some. So
We always recommend more bubbly
and less OJ.
Cheers! If you'd like to see pictures from today's episode, you can find us at murder.mimosas on Instagram. You can also find us at murder.mimosas on TikTok, Twitter, and if you have a case you would like us to do, you can send that to murder.mimosas@gmail.com. And lastly, we are on Facebook at Murder and Mimosas Podcast, where you can interact with us there. We love any type of feedback you can give us, so please rate and review us on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to A Nefarious Nightmare. Music used in the theme was originally recorded by Ghost Stories Incorporated, remixed by Ryan RCX Murphy. Additional background music is provided by Epidemic Sound. A Nefarious Nightmare is scripted, researched, and produced by Courtney Finner and Amanda Cronin. This podcast is a Cloud 10 podcast managed by Sim Sarna, Sahiba Krieger, and Jamie Rice of Murderish and Dirty Money Moves. You can help us grow our show by leaving us a 5-star written review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Or you can join our Patreon for lighthearted bonus content. Thank you, and as always, be vigilant.